Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Today, my guest is part of two bands, Peyote Ugly and Blade Palace, and he also has a podcast called Raised on Rhythm.
You got it.
I'm here with Nate Lewis.
Blake, thank you for having me on, man. Honored to be here.
Of course. So, I recently just met you through Third Wheel Podcast Studios.
Yeah, shout out to Third Wheel. Yeah, already.
So, that's actually a big step of coming to the studio to record your podcast. So I did my podcast for a year and a half without having a full podcast studio. I had studio spaces where I had to bring my own equipment.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I can't even imagine how further ahead my podcast would have been with an actual studio with everything in place. So how did you get to have your podcast, and how did you learn about Third Wheel Podcast Studios?
You know what was interesting is when I first started doing Raised on Rhythm about a year ago, I actually had a bunch of my gear that was sitting around, and I used to go to bands' practice spaces when I first started, and I would just set up all mobile wherever they were at. And it was a big advantage because, with COVID and stuff, it made it complicated with studio. So I would just tell bands, if you got a garage, warehouse, I'll go there, set up where you're at, and we'll just record the whole thing in there. But, I had mics, and I, knew enough about audio production and stuff like that. I could do all the production work myself. So I looked at it as kind of an adventure. I would just go to all these, random, warehouse spaces, rehearsal spots, run down. I didn't care, I just go wherever. But that was kind of the goal when I started the podcast, was to capture these conversations and talk to musicians and actually give us a forum, a platform where we could talk the way we normally talk to each other outside venues.
And this was, did this start during the pandemic, or did you have a podcast before that?
This was September 6th, 2020 was when the first episode of Raised on Rhythm came out.
Ooh.
And I'd been told prior to that, I'd been told, you have a radio voice, or podcast voice, I didn't really want to do anything with that because I just sort of felt like it was a little cliche, a white dude in his 30s starting a podcast, you know what I mean? So that was, all pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. And I had just moved to Seattle at the beginning of 2018.
Where are you from?
I grew up in Miami, Florida.
There's wild boys out there.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I grew up in the Miami area. My family moved there when I was about 3 years old. I went to school in Tallahassee, Florida. I actually ended up living in Tallahassee for about 7 years total.
There we go.
I have a bachelor's degree in political science from FSU that I don't really do anything with. And after Tallahassee, I had a gig in Atlanta, Georgia. Lived up there for about a year and a half.
For music or just
for
work?
This was a professional drumming gig. I used to play drums at a place called the Dark Horse Tavern for a live band karaoke night. And it was called Meddlesome Incorporated. So if you're not familiar with live band karaoke, think karaoke, but you get to sing with an actual band that knows 150 songs. You just come up on stage.
Crazy. They're your personal jukebox, basically.
Basically, I thought it was punk rock as hell. I loved it. I loved the idea. And they'd been doing it a long time before I got there. I just happened to be living in Atlanta. At that point, I kind of was looking for a gig. And it was oh, yeah, I could do this. So I kind of got that on a fluke. And I was there. Shout out to my old boss, Curtis Clark, Jess, everybody that manages the Dark Horse Tavern in Atlanta. I was there for about a year. I played drums there. But at the time, I had already known my bandmates in Blade Palace, because we had all met when we were still living in Tallahassee.
Mm-hmm.
They were living there, even though Elliot and Rob, my bandmates, they're from Jacksonville, Florida originally, but we all found ourselves in Tallahassee. One by one, Elliot was the first of us to kind of move out here some years ago, and then Rob followed him about a year after that. This was when I was in Atlanta at that point, but I kept in touch with both of them. And I knew they were great songwriters, and me and Rob had actually been in a band in Tallahassee before. So when they were out here, I was just have you found a drummer yet? You found a drummer yet? We talk every now and then. Mm-hmm. And after about a year back and forth like that, it's dude, I just need to move out here and we need to do this. So, I gave my notice on the gig in Atlanta, packed up all my gear in a pod, had it shipped out here, and threw a suitcase full of clothes in my Toyota and drove from Atlanta to Seattle. January 31st, 2018 is when I got to the Seattle city limits, and I've been here ever since doing my thing.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So how long have you been professionally just doing music or being able to make a living off music?
On and off since I was about 14.
Wow.
Some years have been, more full in that way than others. I've always done other stuff to make money too. I've worked in restaurants, warehouses, driven Uber and Lyft, you name it. I've done plenty of odd jobs on the side. Always have. I think it kind of like frees me up to play the music that I want, the way I want to play with the people who I love playing with it. That's really what I, value first and foremost. So I did my first professional gig when I was about 14. I played drums in a classic rock cover band in Hollywood, Florida, which is like between Miami and Fort Lauderdale. They didn't know I was 14 when they hired me for this. I found it it was sort of like the equivalent of Craigslist back then. It's on the internet, like my dad's computer. And they found out I was 14, when I showed up to the gig, because my dad had to drive me because I didn't have a driver's license yet, but my dad drove me out. I had, my drums. And in Florida, like the law, or at least at that time, basically said that, if you're under 21, you could be in the bar as long as you're there to do like an entertainment job or something, like a professional entertainer, as long as it's not like a adult strip club, establishment, something like that, obviously, So I would do the gig, and during the set breaks, obviously I couldn't hang out at the bar. I'd have to go outside. My dad would be outside and everything like that. And we played classic rock covers for, probably maybe like 5 people on a Sunday night,
Wow.
And the band, I made like $20, and it was the best $20 I ever made. It was just like, I'm staring at it like, it's possible, so on and off ever since. I've done cover gigs as a professional drummer, but I also played just in original bands too. Just playing original music. When I was a teenager, I used to play a lot of pop punk and death metal. This was back in the early 2000s. And later on, I kind of, evolved more. Like I really got into more music that had a lot of dynamics in it. So, a lot of the indie rock that was happening in the late 2000s, early 2010s, if that's a word.
Yeah, I think that's the new thing.
Is that the new thing? Okay.
2010 era.
As long as I'm correct with it. So, when I was living in Tallahassee, I started playing music again. I played at a place called Open Mic Night at the Warehouse. It's no longer around, but it was an open mic night. I used to go out there every Wednesday night and do a drum solo for about 4.5 years.
Can you make? I'm still so new to bands.
Yeah.
Can a band member make it solely off just being a cover artist for the rest of their life, or like, is that reach a limit?
When I lived in Atlanta, I essentially made the equivalent of a full-time income doing it. I mean, it wasn't a ton of money, but it was enough to where I could pay my rent and eat off that when I was playing out there, because they were doing it 5 nights a week at that bar. And it was popular, especially on the weekends. There was a line out the door to get into the place. I'm sure there still is, it was a hit, people would come out. And for me as a drummer, that's the kind of gig where you're not in the spotlight. You're there as a functionary to do a job, to learn these songs and play. It's not like people are coming out like, oh, I'm coming here to see like Nate Lewis the drummer or something like that. Maybe a few.
It's called like 70s night or something, and you just come to play. You listen to that type of music, or what do people expect?
So at Metalsome, when they first started, it was actually all 80s hair metal, because this was 2003. So it was like a lot of Poison, Whitesnake, Motley Crue, which I actually had to learn when I got there, because by the time I got there in late 2016, 17, they had added a lot of Blink-182, The Killers, stuff that, it was like the next era coming up. I had to struggle to learn Motley Crue, Whitesnake, because I wasn't around for that era. My boss used to swear I was on cocaine during those gigs, because I grew up playing punk rock, and I used to rush so bad when I was playing drums to like some of the 80s heavy metal stuff. And in my boss's mind, the only way anybody could rush that bad on a song is if they were high on blood. It took me like 6 months to just be like, I don't do that stuff. Like, this is just like, I grew up playing Blink-182. I'm used to like playing every song 20 BPM, or whatever faster live than it is on the record. I mean, that's just punk rock,
That's so.
Yeah.
What I've noticed with older hip hop artists, you can actually, like, sometimes there's a age difference where like the new generation doesn't want to mess with the older generation.
Sure.
But when the older generation does have something to offer, like a Jay-Z, those younger artists need that Jay-Z. But when it comes to bands, does a younger band need an older band? Like, do bands collab in that way, or what can a younger band get out of a newer band, like from an older band?
I think you could definitely learn things, and you have to be ready to learn from all different kinds of people, all different backgrounds. You can learn something from anybody, if you're willing to listen. I think that, for me, doing a gig like that, those kind of old school gigs, where you'd be on stage for like 3 hours because you were like the hired music at the bar. Like what DJs do now is what bands did back then, where it's like, and it's not just you playing your original music. You might be playing covers, or, maybe a little mix of both, or just jamming, improvising. there used to be a lot more gigs like that for working musicians, because the idea of a nightclub, you know, having like a DJ or something, you know, spinning like hip hop or pop, EDM, whatever it was. I grew up in Miami, which was maybe like 10 years ahead of the curve on that one, like in the 90s. So even then I sort of saw the future a little bit, I think, with that, or I saw what was coming. But now, you know, after like, especially I remember after like 2010 or 2011, there was like a paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was living in Tallahassee, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of nightclubs, like right in the December 2011, a whole bunch of clubs there that used to be like Floyd's, where bands would play, and the Engine Room, they all shut down in the same month. Wow. And when they reopened a few months later, a lot of them were rebranded into EDM venues.
Oh shit.
And that was the first time in my life. It was crazy, because like I remember all of a sudden, like, white college frat dudes, right? You know, or like, oh, we're going to see like Juicy J tonight, or like Lil Wayne. I'm like, shouldn't y'all be like going to like Dave Matthews or like Bon Jovi? It was just weird to me, because I grew up in Miami, so of course it's like par for the course down there. But it's like Tallahassee, I was like, okay, this is like, it's interesting. You know, it's just a shift in the whole culture. You know, so getting back to your question, I digress a little bit, but yeah, there's all sorts of things that you can learn, I think, from bands that really had to go through an era where you had to be a very solid live performer, because you're doing this stuff multiple nights, and people have a very high standard, you know, for what a band should be, you know, or what they expect from a band. Whereas as now, I think it's a little, especially with all original shows, you know, it's a little bit looser. You can kind of get on stage and people sort of give you that time. They might not be into what you're doing, but you know, they're a little more, they'll let you get loose with it. Whereas like, you know, maybe if you were like a working bar band, you know, if you couldn't keep a solid 2 and 4 all night, and if you were fucking up, it's like, that was a no-go, man. Cause if the audience doesn't trust you to give them a steady beat and a steady rhythm, they're not going to want to dance. Yeah. And if they're not going to want to dance, you got a problem.
Like people know, that's so like, just, it's human nature. Like we know if something's on beat or off beat.
Exactly.
That's so crazy.
And you know what's crazy? Like, what affects your perception with that too? I mean, substances do play into that too.
Okay.
Really? You know, and yeah, because like and again, I don't advocate for this necessarily, but you know, when you're on a substance that puts you more in touch with reality, you know, say like an upper, like cocaine or amphetamines or things like that, you're more in touch with rhythmic fluctuations.
Oh gosh.
You know, so when you hear music coming out, and if the beat's like off by a little bit or something like that, or it's kind of human, it's a lot more jarring to you. And this is why with like quantization and electronic music and things like that, why that, you know, people that are into that experience, you know, tend to be more drawn to that kind of music, because they, you know, they gravitate to that very calculated, you know, quantized kind of groove like that. Now, if you want to enjoy a rock and roll show, on the other hand, get a couple whiskey Red Bulls in you or something like that, because then, you know, if you have some alcohol in your system, how that affects your perception. If the rhythm is kind of like, you know, it's a little like herky jerky or something like that, you're more forgiving of it, because your brain is like slower to react. You know, so it's like, that's why you say like, we'll sound a lot better if you get a couple drinks. Straight up, like,
do bands, or at least when hip hop first started and became mainstream, did bands look down on hip hop?
Absolutely. But also, you know, jazz musicians look down on rock bands, and classical musicians look down on jazz musicians. That paradigm, that's always the same. If you go back in the history of music, it's like every generation prior always thought the next generation's music was shit, or it just wasn't up to the standard, you know, that the previous generation was. But it just evolves. That's just human expression. You know, objectively, I don't really look at it as like anything's like better or worse. It's just, it's a different time. It's a different era. And people have different sensibilities, because if something's already been done to death before, you know, it's not going to hit people the same way if somebody else does it after that.
Right.
You know, if you're doing something that's totally out there and original, even if it's a little rough around the edges, like sometimes people connect with that.
That was hip hop for a while.
Exactly. Yeah. And if, you know, one thing that hip hop really did to popular music was when you started to have sampling and drum machines come along, particularly, you know, the 808s in the 80s and things like that, the stuff that Sir Mix-a-Lot was using in his early heyday, you know, that really started to quantize groove and get people used to that idea of like grooving to a machine. And what happened was when digital editing came along and that merged with that, all of a sudden now for rock bands even, they would record drums and they would go back and like line up every hit to be perfect, because the human ear was adapted to that. Even if the sonic aesthetic was very different in rock and roll, you know, it sort of forced that shift in the sonic paradigm. Like if you think about hip hop, you could take a sample of a perfect drum hit, for instance, right? And you could EQ it up so it's nice and thumping, bass wise. And the thing about big bass frequencies like that is if they're off time by even just a little bit, right, it's going to jar you like really bad when you're listening to it. So if you listen to a lot of rock and roll records, especially like older ones, from the 60s and 70s, you notice how they kind of sound like thin, in the drums and stuff.
And it was live, so it was never completely on beat.
Exactly. Or sometimes they would play to clicks, back then. That's a whole nother subject. But, when you had the ability all of a sudden to put, bass frequencies perfectly in time, it just elevated the standard for the rest of basically all of music, rock and roll, pop, everything like that, and it was a mixed blessing because if you have to edit a record to death that much, to get it to sound a certain way, what happens when the band goes out and plays live and it sounds like totally different? People feel kind of deceived at that point,
Dude, that's what people deal with hip hop still. Like people you're never going to get the same experience when you're listening to hip hop in your headphones versus if you're listening to it live.
Absolutely. I always compare it to like if you were writing a novel on Microsoft Word, for instance, versus if you gave somebody a typewriter and a bunch of speed and you were just like, go. That would change how you would write.
Right.
For sure. Because if all you could do is go on a typewriter, you'd probably stick to words that you knew better. You wouldn't have autocorrect. You couldn't go back and correct anything. You have to stay very in the moment. And again, one isn't necessarily, at the end of the day, you listen to a record and it's either a good record or it's not. Doesn't really matter how you got there. So that's digital editing really brought things to a different point with rock and roll. And it happened even in the days of analog tape too. I mean, that would happen where you would have to have a band record to analog tape, and then to make a chorus more consistent, an engineer would have to take a razor blade and splice the tape and you're an audio nerd, so you probably know a little bit about this. Like you'd move a section of tape here and there to like fix a bad hit. And it wasn't the kind of stuff that a local band, just going into the studio for the first time might have had the budget to do. Maybe if you had like a Van Halen level budget for recording back then, it was the kind of stuff you could do then. So it's always been around. It just got a lot easier once you put it on a computer instead of having to sit there with the razor blade and tape,
God.
Yeah.
That's so interesting to me about like, I never really realized how hip hop could have helped with that. So what about when like a remastered Beatles album or something comes up, does that mean they're like quantizing or like changing the beat structure, or just making it?
Not necessarily, because with the Beatles record, you're talking about a finished master, so there's really no way to get in and like go through individual stems and stuff like that. And I think, frankly, I don't think fans would have it for a minute if they did something like that to one of those records. Typically, I think with that, again, I can't speak because I haven't, been in on those mastering sessions, but a lot of times it will be bringing up the volume to more of a modern loudness standard.
Okay.
Which, and that's the other interesting thing actually you mentioned with that, because the other thing about it is with vinyl records, right? You can only cut a groove so deep in terms of bass frequencies before it starts to get to the point where it becomes problematic because the needle just skips out of the record.
Right.
So if you listen to records from 50, 60 years ago, that there's a lot less bass frequency information going on in there. Whereas now you could take a lot of those same records, and if you just, that was the big complaint with CDs when they first came out, was that, it just sounds like real tin and like thinny. And it's because now you actually like you could have more bass frequencies in a record, and you didn't have to worry about like a needle skipping out of the vinyl or something like that.
Yeah.
So it changed. Yeah, that was another paradigm shift in physical media that just changed the whole sound of music. In the 80s and 90s especially.
So what is your like wheelhouse when it comes to music? So you're a drummer. What else do you know how to do? Do you know how to mix and master at all? Or
yeah, I taught myself recording when I was about 19, 20, because in the bands I was playing in back then in Miami, we were playing in like pop punk and hardcore bands, and we didn't have like record industry down there. There was nobody that was going to come along and give you like a big budget to get in the studio necessarily. So my buddies and I mean, we had computers. This was like maybe 2005, 6. And my buddy had a bootleg copy of Cool Edit Pro, which is the precursor to Adobe Audition.
Okay.
We didn't have the money to get into a legit studio, but we knew how to download bootleg software off, LimeWire and shit like that. So that was kind of how it went. And, I had like a warehouse space, that I had my drums in at the time. And my buddy in there, we used to just get Taco Bell and like stay up like all night, just like record anything. Record a guitar amp, record ourselves talking smack into a mic, and just try to figure out how to make it sound good. And YouTube was still in its infancy then, so we could learn a little bit from them, but it was still like back then it was like websites and forums like trying to Google if we didn't know how to work something.
Right.
But that's really the whole reason I did that, was because, again, like we, $60 an hour to get into a studio or something like that at the minimum, like we didn't have money for that, but we knew how computers work. So
Right.
start up with that. As far as like, drumming goes, I was educated as a jazz drummer when I was a kid. I was educated as a classical percussionist, so like marimba, xylophone, because back then, this is way before School of Rock, and none of my music teachers in elementary or middle school knew how to give me a grade for just playing the drum set. I was like, well, here's a xylophone. Now you can do your major scales, right? So now I can give you a grade on that.
Right.
I was like, all right. It was kind of a blessing in disguise, because that's how I learned about harmonies and chords and, song structure, things like that. Came in handy later on. As far as that other stuff, I've tried to teach myself guitar 4 different times. I just don't have it in me. I just don't have the interest. I stick to drums. That was always what made sense.
Do you think you need to be a certain age when you learn majority of like instruments? Or?
No, not at all. I think it's just how much you put into it. And it can be more advantageous if you start later on in life.
Really?
Because you actually know what you're trying to do then.
Okay, yeah.
When I was growing up, I was just all over the place. I was doing classical and jazz and rock and like all this different stuff, just trying to be as good of a drummer as I possibly could, hoping that, once I got out of high school, like as long as I was just good enough or whatever, like the business side would take care of itself and I could eat as a professional musician. Got my ass handed to me on that one when I got out of high school,
What'd you learn? Like what did...
The main thing for me, it was really a question of finding out what I wanted to do and what I really enjoyed doing, because I'd had those times where, again, it's like I'd made a full-time living or a decent living playing drums, and I was miserable because I hated the music I was doing,
because it wasn't yours. Or...
It just whatever it wasn't, and sometimes you get like that on gigs too, like a professional gig, not original bands so much, but like, you just play the same songs over and over and over again. And you go like that way for, a year or two, even after a couple of years, you can get in kind of a rut doing that.
Like a cycle. I hate cycles personally.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, man.
So you graduated college.
Yeah.
And what did you learn about the music industry at that point? Like, did you have any goals of like, did you think you got trained as a jazz drummer?
Yeah.
Did you think you were gonna get picked up by like a label, or how does it work for like a drummer? What were your goals at the time?
This tells you how old I am. Is that when I was in elementary, middle school, it kind of goes back to watching my first drum teacher, Mike Salenza, great drum teacher, and he was the only adult that I really saw in my life that seemed to be happy. It's like everybody else around me, like my parents were stressed, my teachers were stressed, the principal definitely didn't want to be there. But it's like, the only like grown up that I really knew at that point that seemed to be like chilling and like doing his thing was my drum teacher, and he wasn't a rich person by any means. He was, playing gigs and teaching drum lessons, just doing his thing, but he did what he enjoyed. And being around that kind of energy was like, man, like, well, whatever that is, I want to be doing that. So, I thought about it. I was like, well, maybe I could get like a day job as a percussionist in a symphony orchestra, and then I could like play in rock bands at night. My love of drumming came from watching Taylor Hawkins, who now plays in the Foo Fighters, but back then he played in Alanis Morissette's live band right before the Foo Fighters. And I saw the Alanis Morissette video for You Ought to Know. My family first got like MTV. I was like 9 years old at the time. And they cut away to Taylor Hawkins playing drums for like, 2 seconds. And Taylor's a very visual dude, he's swinging his hair around, just going nuts. And I saw that when I was 9. I was just like, whatever that is, like, yeah, I want to be doing that. That looks cool. That's what made me want to play drums.
But did you see them as this like huge like icon in the music industry, or were you focused on just any type of living where you could just make music that was good for you?
A little bit of both. I mean, I definitely had rock star dreams for sure, but I also like, practically speaking, I would have been just as happy, I think, if I'd, just had a regular gig like every week, just playing music. I really wanted to play. I didn't really want to teach, I wasn't really interested in doing that. So growing up, that was kind of the ambition. And then starting at about, 98, 99, when digital downloads came along, and, for the next 20 years, I feel like I just watched the music industry turn on its head over and over and over again, just evolve. Like anything I learned about it 2 years would be worthless, because something changed up, but there was a new social media medium that came along and shifted the whole marketing culture. So I guess the only thing I've really learned in the last 20 years is just kind of how to adapt, and I don't think I've done a great job with it at all times. I mean, it's been kind of haphazard. Thank God for my day jobs. I'll put it that way, but just kind of, just.
What's that like though? Is that like
yeah.
seeing something like change every couple of years? Is that exciting or is that scary or what is that?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, it makes it very difficult to make long-term plans and set long-term goals for yourself because, people ask me like, oh, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Right.
I'm like, I just think about how different the world was, period, 5 years ago, and industries that people saw themselves in that don't even exist anymore, and then whole new things that just came out of nowhere, and like you never even thought you could make a living doing that. Like, 20 yeyears ago, the idea of somebody like making a living off of doing videos on the internet, it was just like, what the fuck? You couldn't even see it back then. It wasn't even a thing. Pretty much all the jobs or, things that I had told my counselors or teachers or whoever, that I wanted to do, like back in 2003, 4, stuff like that, like symphony orchestra, nobody gets those fucking gigs these days. It's like the amount of people that come out of conservatory versus the amount of people that actually get hired in a symphony. I think it's like less than 1%. It's really minuscule.
Like the NFL kind of? Or
worse. Probably. I
get that.
But yeah, we sort of, it's kind of weird. I mean, I feel like society is a little dishonest in that way, where they said it. We still have these schools set up.
You can be whatever you want, but
like we still send you to school and make you do all this homework and all this busy work under the idea that if you get through this, you can go do this, and then people get out and like those jobs just aren't there for them, and it's like kind of makes you disillusioned. I actually didn't go to college right off the bat, because of that thinking. I was just like, well, how much am I going to pay for tuition at this place versus like how much am I going to be making if I'm lucky to even get this gig at like $100 a night? This math doesn't even make sense. So like, just go out and do it. Like nobody on a gig has ever asked me for a degree in anything. It's just like my qualification is like, can you show up on time, do the job, and are you sober? Okay, cool. You got the gig. Pretty much. That's kind of how music is,
Right. So why'd you go to college?
I went to college because at the time I had a scholarship, Bright Future Scholarship in Florida. If you know Florida, Bright Future is basically like if your grades were decent enough in high school, you get X amount of your tuition covered at a state university. And that scholarship actually was about to expire in 2007. At the time, I was working as a warehouse person, basically.
So how old were you at this point?
I was 21.
Wow, so 2 years off. No, 3 years almost. Yeah.
I was making about just above minimum wage, working in the stockroom at Barnes & Noble, and I got turned down for a quarter an hour raise. Oh. It's just like one of those things where it's like, yeah, I think I'll give the college thing like one more shot because nothing's really popping over here. And it was also kind of a good excuse to get out of Miami, because I was always just such an oddball growing up down there. So I went back to Miami-Dade, got my associates, didn't have to pay any tuition for that. Thank God I was living with my folks, and then transferred up to FSU when I got accepted there with my AA, and that was like my ticket out of Miami basically. So I get up to Tallahassee. I was going to be an electrical engineering major because it was completely the opposite of anything I knew anything about. So I was like, if I go back to college, well, I want to go for something I already know about, so electrical engineering. Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I actually made it through the math and science and stuff like that. But when I got down to the engineering campus at FSU FAMU, I mean, that was when I found myself surrounded by people who really love doing that stuff.
Fucking nerds, right?
I couldn't hang, because I'm looking at it. It's like the way that I think about like drums, music, or playing in bands is the way that these people think about circuit design or mechanics, things like that. And it's just like, I got to stop living a lie at this point. I sunk to a very low point in my life. At that time, I was depressed. I was suicidal, like you name it. Like it was a very dark time in my life. But the first step out of it was changing my major. Got back to the main campus, started doing political science because I could do it in my sleep. My mom was an attorney growing up. My dad was very involved in local politics in Miami. So it's like I spoke the language. I was around it. I almost thought about going off to law school for a little bit. I didn't think I was going to play music again. And then in my senior year, I started going to open mic night at the warehouse on Wednesdays, where I started doing those drum solos. And then on Tuesday, I'd go to the pre-law society meetings, right? So it's like these two very, very different worlds. And after about 2 months of that, I'm just looking and I'm just like, I'm going to go over here with the musicians. Like, I like this stuff, you know, like this is more in my wheelhouse.
Were they like welcoming? Like when you went to like an open mic, would you make like a friend every night, or how was that?
It was a really amazing experience with open mic night at the Warehouse, because the first night I ever went there, I had no idea. I knew a buddy through the College of Engineering, oddly enough. He was a guitarist, and he was like, oh yeah, come over here. Like, I'm going to play at this open mic night. I'm like, all right, cool. And went over, and the room at this place, the Warehouse in Tallahassee, Florida, that was the name of it. The room was so insane acoustically. I walk in here, I mean, like, you mean just anybody can just roll up in here? I don't have to book this place like 2 months in advance or something. So about a month later, when I finished up my courses, I went out on Wednesday night, and I knocked on the door, and this guy, Doc Russell, who, you know, ran the Warehouse at the time, he ran the open mic night. He answered the door, and he could have said anything in the world to me, you know, in that moment. And I'm just like there with all my drum gear on a rack. And I'm like, hey man, is it cool? Like, if I play drums, I heard there's an open mic. And he's just like, yeah, sure. You know, like, come on in. So it was cool. And, I did it. I fell flat on my face, cause I hadn't been on stage in years at that point. But I had the time of my life. And being the drummer at the open mic night was kind of like being the hot girl at the party, because like all these singer-songwriters, you know, were hanging around. Oh, wow. And it was like, oh, you know, you want to come in and sit in with me on stage? Everybody wanted me to, like, you know, be their backing drummers. So they could look a little bit cooler or something like that, you know? So I started to meet all these singer-songwriters that were hanging around there. And one of them was a guy named Tim Rock, and we started a band, or I joined, you know, a band that he had going in Tallahassee called the Rosy Shades. And we did our thing in Tallahassee for a couple of years. Like, it was after I got done with college, and you know, we recorded a couple EPs. I recorded again, all DIY recording, and we did shows around there. We opened up for a band called Wild Child at Club Down Under. We had a song on a TV commercial in Poland, oddly enough. It was weird how that happened. Submitted it through a blog, and a music supervisor found us and like paid us to license it out. It's really, really random.
What year was that?
That was 2013.
Okay, yeah. So blogs are still pretty relevant.
It was prominent at that time, for sure. It was just kind of an odd thing, because we couldn't get like 10 people to a show in Tallahassee to save our lives, and all of a sudden, like, our music is on this like international TV commercial, getting like Facebook likes from the UK and Germany and all these places, and it was gnarly. But that, you know, that project fizzled out after like another year, and I was still playing the open mic night.
See, that's are you saying project by band? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, band. See, I'm using them synonymously.
See, when I had the Pretty Awkward on, they said that too. Like, why do people in bands call their bands projects?
Because, you know, sometimes you're in that phase as a band where it's like you are working with somebody on music, or, you know, just ideas, and you might not know where it's going to go. You know, you don't necessarily go into everything. It's, you know, asking somebody like, oh, you want to start a band together. It's like asking somebody if they want to get married to you. You know what I mean? Okay. Like, you don't just like go for that right off the bat. You might hang out and date for a little bit or something like that. Try some different ideas. Maybe if that, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so, you know, that's, you know, when a lot of times when people say the word project, like in the band scene and cultures and stuff like that, it's talking about like, you know, I might be working on this thing with so-and-so or this and that. We might, you know, you might not have anything out yet. You might not be playing a show yet, but it's just sort of a way of saying like, yeah, like we're working on that, but it's not like, don't try to look us up on Spotify or something. Yeah.
It stops being a project once you get like recognition.
There's no official terminology for it really.
Okay.
But you know, if you want to call it a band at some point, I mean, a band has this kind of connotation just from my experience around it, where, you know, it's like band is like, okay, there's like a set membership more or less, and there's a, you know, set of original material in place. I mean, a band could be whatever you want it to be. When I started Raised on Rhythm, like I interview bands in Seattle, but I don't focus really on any one particular genre. So like Mirror Gloss, for instance, you know, 2 singers and a DJ, producer, like that's a band to me. You know, like they might not be playing guitars. They probably don't sound anything like Apology Wars or, you know, Elvis Batchild, or, you know, a guitar band or something like that.
And these are, for the audience listening, these are all Seattle bands.
These are all Seattle bands, yeah.
So I'm just going to tell you how I'm thinking.
Go for it.
I just want to see if I'm on the right page. I'm still, because I'm still really, I'm right now I'm going through a phase where I'm soaking in all this information about bands and pop. Yeah. So when you say back on the project band thing, so would you say like a project is like when you're like a thing with someone, and then a band is when you're officially dating and you're telling people, like Nirvana would be a band. That's not a project. Or is it really just... You know what I mean? Like,
listen, this isn't like the NFL rule book. You know what I mean? It's like,
I'm just trying to get hip to the hip talk,
absolutely,
to the band talk.
This is the greatest reason to do a podcast, man. You just soaked up all this game, all these interviews you've done, man, for sure. But like, yeah, I mean, project band, I use them synonymous, but I'd say like, if we have material, if we had a record out and there's a press picture out somewhere and whatnot, then that's band.
Got it. So how many bands have you been part of overall?
Probably about 26 in my
Holy
lifetime.
shit.
Yeah.
Is that good or bad? Like, is that like, this is one more like dating lingo.
Yeah.
So like if you tell
someone, I
someone,
got a high count.
yeah. So if you talk to, if you're like, if a girl or a guy is like, so how many people you've been with? 26 versus band. If you've been with a lot of bands, is that good or what?
Oh man, I mean, every one of them was a learning experience. That's the thing about it.
That's what she said.
Same. Yeah,
there
same shit. I always joke that when it comes to bands, I have like a much higher maturity level than I do when it comes to like real relationships in my personal life. They're two different things. But if this was, the equivalent, if we're talking the equivalent of romance, I've probably been like divorced 20 times now or something like that. But wow. I don't know. But it's life because they were all different eras. I mean, the first one I was in, I was like 14, and I met these, a couple dudes on like AOL Instant Messenger, just to let you know how long ago it was. And that was our first band in Miami. I'm actually about to see those dudes in a couple weeks, and I'm going to go down there. We still hang out. We're still cool to this day.
That's dope.
Our band was called Pink Eyed Sex Monkeys.
Oh, gosh.
And we used to just get together and play pop punk covers on the weekend at my bassist's house. And somewhere out there on the internet is our really, really crappy recording of All the Small Things by Blink-182, us covering it. If you that's listening to this wants to try and dig that up, be my guest. You could probably blackmail me with those recordings at this point.
Oh, my gosh.
But, it went from that. And it was all different styles of music, too, over the years, because over 20 years I've been doing it now. It's like the paradigms and the music cultures have shifted so many times. Like when I was first doing it in South Florida, this was like 2001, and like every other band had a DJ because they were trying to copy Limp Bizkit because because that was popping at the time. And then fast forward 3 years and they're all trying to copy Blink-182, and 3 years more and now they're trying to copy hardcore. But it's like whatever the big trend is that later on diffuses through the music scene, and everybody's trying to ride that wave.
Were you a drummer through all 26 bands?
Always a drummer, yeah.
Can you sing at all?
No, never tried. Never wanted to. Singing, I play drums to express the things that I want to express, but I can't sing them, and I can't rap about them, and I can't, I get the emotions out that I have a hard time expressing through vocals, but I have no problem with that. Like I enjoy doing that.
But how does that? Can you explain how that works? How do you express through drums?
So express through drums. It's a little bit different if I'm recording, because that's different. Obviously, I don't have a live, visual to go with it, so I have to be much more careful about staying in the pocket and being very deliberate in my hits and in the rhythmic consistency and stuff like that. Live on stage. Mm-hmm. It's all sorts of body language. Last Saturday night, for instance, we did the show with Monster Watch, Peyote Ugly, and Frond at Adaball. And that night was fun because...
So Adaball is a band or a place?
Adaball's a bar in Fremont, which you're not 21 yet. So,
there we go.
When you are, I'll buy you your first shot. That was cool. I got you. But so that was an outdoor stage. And I really had a lot of room to just flail around because, acoustically I could play a lot louder there because the sound doesn't bounce off the walls as quick. Mm-hmm. So expression when I'm playing drums could be everything from a head nod to a grimace, or my body language, my face, the way it looks, winding my arms up for certain hits, or like crosses when I just want to like emphasize a certain hit. Yeah. It's a visual thing, and it's very hard for me to express here on audio. Come out to a Blade Palace show. We're playing at the substation this Wednesday. Come out to see Peyote Ugly. You'll see more of what I'm talking about there. I could show you better than I can tell you, but there is an expression to it.
What about when you're like home alone? Like I hear like rappers or even singers, whoever, they're able to like write out like how they're feeling.
Sure.
So how do you do that when you're on your own?
When I'm in a room all by myself, it's kind of interesting because I'll go into a very abstract headspace a lot there. And honestly, a lot of the stuff that I play by myself really I don't play it live. It's just like it's special because it's just there for myself when I'm all by myself and there's nobody else around.
It's like a mantra almost.
I'm not sure. It's just stuff that I find really interesting, but that I'm not sure that anybody else would. Music is like a language,
Right.
you know, and it's like when I'm on stage in front of people, I'm talking, I'm having a conversation very different than if I'm in my practice space by myself. I'm just talking to myself. I'm probably saying stuff that might sound crazy if I were to like express it, or, you know, it might not convey the emotion to somebody else that it conveys to myself because they don't understand it.
But maybe that's what you need to release. Maybe you need to put that out. Maybe that's
sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, and that's the whole point of playing a lot of shows, you know, is you try different stuff out, you know, and you're like, well, man, I was messing around with that. Let me see real quick. You know, I might not stick to the part that was on the record. I might change up a fill here and there. I'm like, okay, let me see what happens when I try that. I was like, okay, man, nobody seemed to really dig that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So but again, it's like, it's experimenting with dialogue in that way. It's something that happens a lot at local shows, especially too, because there's not this pressure that you get with like big arena shows where like everybody's like, you know, you're paying $100 for a ticket. Like everybody's like, you better deliver the goods. You know, they're expecting a certain thing. That's the beauty of, you know, house shows and backyard shows and punk rock. I mean, I forget who you were interviewing, but you know, somebody said house show and you thought it was like house music and stuff like that.
Yes.
And I was just like, oh.
Okay,
man,
so
bro.
wait.
Yeah, it's cool.
So that's on me, not Gemma? Like that's a real thing. Like house show scene is an actual scene.
Yeah, so house shows and backyard shows really get started because, you know, you got to be 21 to get into the bars, you know.
Okay.
But there's a whole environment outside of that where it's, you know, if you're like under 21, or a lot of times it's people too, trans people, BIPOC people, if they feel like not really like excluded or like unsafe, you know, and sometimes in traditional venues,
right.
You know, I would hope that doesn't happen in Seattle, but unfortunately.
We got Cop Hill though, right?
Yeah, you could say that.
I don't want to stereotype people by saying
I can't speak from that perspective myself, but there are sort of like alternative environments like that where people create spaces and you just have a bunch of bands in your living room, you know, invite like 3 or 4, like come play or like play a backyard. Like when I grew up in Miami, houses down there didn't have basements. In Florida, because the sea level's too high. So we would do backyard shows in Miami. Like you just invite like a couple of your friends' bands, and you just all play like a backyard show. The sound is like dog shit. You know, it's not great, but that's not the point. It's like you're just coming over to like all experience a moment like that together. And, you know, when I was doing it, there might be some underage drinking going on, stuff like that. This was back years ago, you know, but
I got 2 things. First,
sure.
A little off topic, and then I have a follow-up.
Go for it.
When you said that the sea level is so high that you can't have basements, I was just literally on my phone this morning, and this poor family in, I think it was New York, drowned because of like, was it Hurricane Ida or whatever?
Yeah, the remnants of Ida. Yeah,
that's
very sad.
Craziness.
Yeah.
I never thought, like, I guess for, like when I was in Oregon, because I picked up surfing and also drove through Oregon to go to LA, and driving through Oregon, there's literal signs like on the road on the coast that says like tsunami warning zones.
Sure.
I'm like, I've never seen that here in Seattle.
It's gnarly.
I never really thought about that.
A lot of other parts in America, houses have basements, but in Florida, because of where like it's basically like 2 feet above sea level, and it's a limestone, like geographically speaking, it's like limestone foundation underneath. So you really can't like dig down into that to like have a basement in a house. So for a house show, if you wanted to do it down there, you'd probably do it in like your backyard. And when I was growing up, I had a couple friends that lived in the hood, and it was great because like their neighbors would like nobody would ever call in a noise complaint on you because they were going to throw a party the next day, right? So it's like, it was cool. It's like, and they didn't even care. I mean, we might be like a death metal band or something like that. It was like, they didn't give a shit. Like, you just play whatever you want. They're like, yeah, it's cool, you know, because they're going to be playing like, you know, something later on at like 4 a.m. or like having a crazy party over there. So you just do backyard shows like that. And in other parts of the country, it might be a basement show or a house show. And again, you kind of create those environments. They're chaotic. And like I say, they're rough around the edges because, you know, the production is obviously non-existent. It's just everybody bringing their instruments and setting up and playing music. But it's really an interesting environment for experimentation and new stuff in that way too, because you're just trying out all different kinds of stuff. It's not an established audience. Sometimes those shows are actually the foundation to build audiences that then later on go into the clubs, you know, as those bands grow. And when those bands are first starting out, you know, they're just hitting all these house shows in different scenes around America, like one by one.
But a house show usually is bands?
It could be bands these days, especially. I mean, it could be, it could be DJs too. It could be rappers. It could be whatever you want. It could be performance art, poetry.
Wow.
I don't. I'm a little bit removed from it now because I'm about to be 35 here. So it's house show scenes. It's like, again, it kind of,
it's like usually colleges.
College, teenagers, stuff like, again,
Okay.
people that, usually people that can't get into like regular bars or nightclubs because they're not of age yet. So, for me to still be going to house shows, that'd be a little weird at this point in my life. Like if I'm in a band that's playing that's different, so
Okay.
the point being is that I'm not necessarily in that world, or at least, not as much. But it's like a whole nother scene within the scene.
Got it. So bands can play like every night though if they want to, like at local bars and things like that. Or how does that work?
Not really. In Seattle, it's kind of a tough sell. My experience up here is like Monday and Sunday nights and Tuesday nights are really kind of like people really don't go out for live music those nights a lot. People really don't go out a lot in general unless they're service industry.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you work in a bar or restaurant yourself, then like Tuesday night, that's like your Saturday night right there.
Got it.
But it's very rare that I see local shows or local music nights on like a Monday or Tuesday night. Maybe if it's like a big touring band coming through, that's a little bit different,
right?
But for the most part, I mean, most of the action in Seattle is going to be on a Friday or Saturday night. I think a lot of that is because of just the tech culture and influence. Like people don't really do nothing. They don't do anything during the week, but Friday, Saturday, they just go crazy hard those nights.
But bands know that they can have those Saturdays and those Fridays and Saturdays to perform.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Like if
like how about that? So first
Sure.
of all, they know that they can perform those 2 days.
Yeah.
Roughly how many venues and bars are there in Seattle for bands to choose from?
I would say just a rough head count offhand.
They can even be shitty, just like overall.
Probably about 14 to 18, I would say, right off the bat.
Wow.
It depends, because some people do shows on some nights, but not others. Or they do like, I know Cha Cha Lounge, for instance, might do like a one-off here and there, but I don't like regularly go to Cha Cha Lounge expecting to see like live music there.
Got it.
You know what I mean? But there's those. And then, like I say, the thing about original bands that's tricky is you can only play the same song so many times before people get sick of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why if you notice like a lot bigger touring acts, you might do like a show, like 1 or 2 shows in a market in a given year or two.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to wait till you have a new album out or something like that. There are exceptions to that rule, like Martial Law Band, for instance, because they might get a lot more like jammy and vibey, and they'll invite other people up to do their songs. So they really like, each show is really an experience in and of itself. It's not just them playing through all their songs like a Spotify playlist.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So there are exceptions to that rule for sure. But like for a lot of bands, like I said, there's only so many times that you can play in the scene before people get sick of you, or unless you got new music out or you're changing it up, you're evolving.
But do you have to fight for those spots though, or is it easy to get into those Friday and Saturday shows wherever? Or
it's definitely not easy to get booked on a Friday or Saturday night, because for most bars and venues, especially post-COVID, I mean, those are the nights they have to make their money.
Got it.
It's like you do not want like a Friday or Saturday night show bombing, because it's like the night that everybody's expecting to get paid, at the bar and stuff. I get it, their businesses. Typically, like the local venues, they might take more chances on like a weeknight if it's a slow night, and that's always like the advice that I always give to bands. There's like, oh, we're trying to get booked or something like that. I'm like, go to a place and offer to play on the slow night, straight up. Like tell them to put you on, because frankly, even if it's just you and the bartender or the sound person, maybe 2-3 other people, if that bartender actually sees you and it's, word gets around, guess what? That bartender's going to go to their boss and be like, yo, like there's this band, they played here on Tuesday night. They might not have nobody now, but put them on a Friday or Saturday because they're good. So it's kind of like get in where you fit in that way. And you could build up to like a Friday or Saturday night. It's a catch-22 for a lot of bands in Seattle, because your friends and people that that want to go out, they all want to go out on a Friday or Saturday night. Nobody wants to go out to go see live music on like a Tuesday or Monday. And like that's a really hard sell. Mm-hmm. Not saying nobody, but it's like it's a much harder sell. So it's a catch-22 sometimes for bands, because venues will be like, well, what's your draw? Or like, how many people can you bring out? I'm like, if you get us on a Friday night, Saturday night, like we'll be all right. If you try and get us out here on Monday night, there ain't gonna be shit.
Right. And then how do bands figure out what their draw usually is going to be? Like, do they have an email? Like, does your band have an email list? Do you have
No.
friends always show up, or what?
I've been told to do an email list. Honestly, I feel like that's really impersonal. I will say to bands, like, honestly, if you are expecting less than 150 people out there, every one of those attendees should be an individual conversation. I'm talking like somebody you see, you're hanging out at the bar with, maybe DM, Instagram, like a message, and be like, hey, what you doing on Friday night? Something like that. Every one of those people should be an individual connection.
Okay.
Because the last thing you want to do, especially, I think especially when you're just starting out, is to just be posting, social media, like, oh, we're playing here on Friday, and then nobody interacts with that because it's basically just an advertisement.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see that in their feed. The engagement's low. That's not a good look. It doesn't really get people hype. So when you're at that level, I think the best thing you could do is to really build those individual connections, because really what you're doing with that, and really where the value of live music is in this day and age, is creating community.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody can go on YouTube and watch a great musician perform, but I'm probably not going to want to go home with somebody I meet in the comment thread.
Right.
You know what I mean? But if there's an event happening and I know that this is a place where I'm probably going to go and I can hang out, I can meet some like-minded people, and we're going to have a good time. And everybody's, it's just going to be good vibes all night. Might even meet a special someone. You never know. If you know that it's going to be a social experience like that, I'm not saying that the bands don't matter. The bands are critical in this. But the music is kind of secondary. I mean, the main selling point for live music is creating that environment. People crave that now, especially in this day and age. I want that. All this Instagram, internet interaction.
What about
stuff
this?
Like that. Yeah.
Before the pandemic,
yeah,
you can easily say that the job market was oversaturated and anyone can find a job. And now that the pandemic's happened, it's way harder to get a job, or even for jobs to even find people that want to work at a McDonald's or whatever type of job it is.
Yeah.
Because of the pandemic, people were scared. But with live music, you think more people are going to live music now, or before the pandemic, where people were going to live music more?
The first couple shows that I went to, in July, especially most of the shows I went to in July, every crowd was going ape shit. I'm talking like Seattle audiences sometimes have a reputation for being very, stoic and standoffish, arms folding. Those first couple weeks, you can go on my Instagram and check this out at Raised on Rhythm. But I had videos from some of those shows, and you just see King Youngblood playing in Barbosa, and motherfuckers are just crowd surfing and stage diving everywhere and going absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Linda from Work, when Peyote played with them at Barbosa, it was just Linda from Work just had the whole floor hopping. People were just so happy.
And explain Barbosa. Is Barbosa, for people listening outside of Seattle, is Barbosa a big local venue, small local venue? Where does Barbosa sit in the Seattle music scene?
I want to say Barbosa is a 200 cap. Don't quote me on that, but it's somewhere in that range. And it's basically the same owners as Numos, which is...
And Numos is where touring artists come to Seattle.
Touring artists, well, some local artists too. I mean, Spirit Award almost sold it out back when they did the show in early July. They actually kicked off the opener. It was with Antonioni and Black Ants. That was an amazing show that night. I was out there. It was great. So local bands can definitely, I know Black Tones have played at Numos and Martial Law Band.
You got to be a bigger person though. If you're an up and coming artist with no fall, you're not going to Numos.
Yeah, and even you just wouldn't want to anyway, because it's just not a good look. You don't want a half empty. It's better to play in a living room and have 20 people in there bouncing into each other and going nuts than it is to play in the bigger venue and have it kind of half empty and people kind of milling about. But as far as Barbosa goes, and this goes for some other venues too, where it's the same owner, but they have two different rooms. Tractor Tavern and Sunset used to kind of have that dynamic too, where it's okay, it's same owner, same people, but you have the bigger room, and then depending on who's hitting you up or who you're trying to get booked out, you could put this person in that room because they'll sell that out, or you can put this person in that room because we think we could have a good night over there, and it just gives them some options to work with as far as booking goes. And
do bands and artists in general, do they look outside of the Seattle music scene? Do they look at neighboring cities like a Bellevue or something like that to perform? Or when people are I'm going to perform tonight,
yeah,
is it most definitely going to be in the Seattle area.
Oddly enough, I have never heard of a rock and roll show happening in Bellevue. Not like I've heard of cover bands that play out there, like bar bands, again, kind of what we talked about earlier. I've never.
See, that's where the money is. So people who are not from Seattle, I feel like the money is in these wealthier, like East Side areas. Why aren't bands and rappers and whoever playing there?
The money is over there, but you really want to play for a crowd of people that's just going to stand there with their arms folded the whole time because they got money. They don't want to move around. Like they're very afraid of how they're going to be perceived or like how they're going to look or like what their coworkers are going to think if a video of them like crowd surfing comes out the next day. Right. Shit like that. It's like, so, and what you're talking about is very interesting. I agree because there is this kind of disconnect.
It's between, oh my God, I'm just realizing there's a disconnect in so many different fields.
There is. It's a disconnect between like, okay, like, and you were talking about this a little bit with Will, when he was on the other week, and the people are over here, the money's over here. Mm-hmm. It's like, and there are things that I think you could do. Again, I know this is a little bit beyond the scope of the podcast. There are policies and things I think you could put in place to kind of like just even that out a little bit, or actually make it so that the people who are excited about live music actually have some money to support it and go check it out. As far as like Bellevue, Redmond goes, again, like, and this is not to say like there are definitely bars over there and there are definitely bars that have live music and bands. Mm-hmm. My experience from what I've seen is it tends to be bands that cater to like a little bit of older audience, or again, it'll be like cover songs, stuff that's like predictable. When that audience goes out, it's a little bit different. They're interested more in like hearing the stuff that reminds them of their youth, or it takes them back to like that place, when they hear certain songs, they may not be open to wanting to hear like something new or like a new band, new ideas.
There needs to be some change that, like, think about it, like all the money, even when it comes like the kids, some parents don't want their kids going to Seattle to go see shows. Like what if there's a concert venue or something in Redmond or Bellevue or whoever, and like local artists were able to go there and perform or whatever.
Sure. I want to say, actually, now that I think about it, and again, like, don't quote me on this because I'm sure I'm blanking on spots, but I want to say there was like I saw that Shayna Shepherd was playing somewhere over there at some point. It's like a performing arts theater in Kirkland, I think, somewhere.
Oh, is it K-Tub maybe?
Maybe. Again, I'm so fuzzy on that I don't want to speak for. No, I just don't want to be incorrect, but
get wild.
I'm sure they're there. Like, I know if you get up to Everett, for instance, like Tony V's is like the spot up there, essentially in Everett, that will have like live bands. If you go down to Tacoma, actually now, with Tacoma, I mean, they got like Alma Mater, Spanish Ballroom, Jazz Bones. Like there's a handful of like venues popping up. I think in part because, and I don't know if I don't have the data to back this one up, but I almost sense that when COVID shut down a lot of the restaurants and a lot of the young people that were living in Seattle that were relying on hospitality for their day jobs, they lost all that work. There was kind of this move down to like either, Tacoma for some of them or like some of these other areas more on the outskirts. So almost there's like this energy for rock and roll shows, especially, that's kind of like migrated to these other areas. It's still in Seattle heavy for sure, but I notice more shows happening like that where Seattle bands will go down to Tacoma or even like Peyote Ugly. We're about to play Olympia September 19th, I want to say. 18th, 19th. I might be blanking on the date. Sorry, Andy. Shout out to Andy Remix Moreno. He's putting it together. Cap City Presents. But we're going to be going down there to Olympia for a show. That's like a big college town too.
So Olympia, for people not from Seattle, that's like almost a 2-hour drive, right?
It's probably 3 if you hit rush hour, like
and
all
that's
the way
south
down.
Of Seattle.
It's about if you have no traffic, it's probably like it's good like hour, 15 minutes. It's not that long if there's no traffic, but there's almost guaranteed to be traffic, like going between
and all
Seattle,
the construction.
There's Tacoma, that part of Tacoma by the Tacoma Dome. It's just like the interstate is just perpetually under construction. Yeah, and I don't know what it is. Do
you go on the 520 bridge at all?
Oh yeah, constantly because driving Uber and Lyft. Yeah, I go all over the city on any given day.
I have this weird. I'm like claustrophobic for certain things, and other things I'm not claustrophobic about. Yeah. But I tell people my biggest fears are spiders and claustrophobia. And this the 520 bridge. Yeah. They're building the train on the right-hand side of it.
Are you talking about the I-90 bridge? Because that's where they're building the light rail at.
The toll bridge. That's 520, right?
No, well, 520 is the one north of that goes straight into Medina.
Green Lake. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm talking about. They're not building a train there?
No, they're building the train on the I-90 one, which is south of there.
Oh, then what the heck are they building on the 520? There's like
I don't know.
there's something below the bridge that they're building, like an add-on of something.
Oh, really?
I thought that was a train.
I knew they were doing construction. I don't think it was going to be a train, though. I think the light rail was going to be going on 90.
Okay, because
But
I was thinking about that. So basically, the
Yeah.
520 bridge is, of course, a bridge across the water.
Yeah, yeah.
It goes from like Bellevue to North Seattle.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this because basically there's like some construction on the right-hand side of the bridge over the water. And I was like, are they building a train there? Because if there's something, if the train collapses or something, it's going straight into the water. So I guess maybe it isn't a bridge, but whatever it is, all this construction has made it so the lanes are super, super skinny. Like they've made like a one-lane road for two people. So like if you swerve to the left, you're crashing into like the pylon pillar. Yeah. If you move to the right, you're crashing into like the car next to you.
It's like the Aurora Avenue Bridge. It's narrow, man.
It's so I have to drive that almost every day, and like it's never gotten easier. I'm like fuck. And then like a couple weeks ago, this utility van just bumper carted the back of my car. There's no damage, but I was like, oh my god! I started swerving in between the. It was terrible. But
be careful, bro.
There's I don't know how we got onto the 520 bridge, but
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Anyways,
we're talking about just shows in Bellevue and Redmond, Kirkland versus Seattle in general, like all these other areas. So
we were talking about like you going to Tacoma. So but with that being said, the reason why I'm asking all these questions about the venues, maybe it's because I'm part of the scene.
Sure,
I see hip hop being the biggest genre in Seattle, and the way that those are the people getting signed right now to record labels.
Absolutely.
But
hip hop is just the biggest genre, period. Like by streaming, if you go by the numbers on Spotify, it's like the most streamed genre, period, is hip hop and R&B. It's like 30% of streams on that. Rock is like is up there, but it's not nearly with hip hop, man. Hip hop dominates.
The last time I heard about like rock country controversy was Lil Nas X, and he's a hip hop artist. Like I haven't really. I need to really tap into rock more.
Sure,
but If hip hop's like the biggest genre in Seattle, why aren't they playing at these like bars? Like, do bars not want hip hop artists? Do hip hop artists not know that they can play at bars, or what's going on with that?
There's definitely some cases, and also, I'm not going to say any names because this is stuff that was told to me in confidence. But there are definitely cases of bar owners and club owners not wanting to book hip hop because of the fear of like violence, or that some kind of like fight or stabbing is going to break out, or something like that. I mean, it's kind of ironic because it's not like that stuff doesn't happen at rock shows sometimes, not frequently, I mean, there's security and stuff like that, but it's like, mosh pits, but, but I don't know. I mean, something that I lived in Atlanta, for a little bit. And it's like, I remember like a lot of the clubs out there, you go to a club there, it's like armed security, like they do not play down there when it comes to club security. Seattle can be a little more chill in that way. And so, because you have to remember too, that security and liability insurance, like that's a huge added expense for event promoters. So if you got a choice as an event promoter between like, okay, I got this event right here where I don't have to get any of that, and it's still going to sell the place out, pack the place out, versus like this event right here where I am going to have to hire a whole extra ton of security and get like insurance and stuff like that. It's like, which one are you going to go with? You probably, if you're a business, you're trying to make money, you're trying to go with the one that has less overhead. So that's part of the reason. The other side of that I see, at least as far as hip hop is concerned, is that when it comes to live, some rappers are better on stage than others.
Okay, right.
I really appreciate a good live rapper. I'll say that right now. Shout out to Liv. I just saw them. They did day in and day out.
Live music.
Man, like if you haven't, that song One Track Mind, that's my favorite song of theirs.
She's dope.
Yeah, great, man. Like, and I saw, the little clips that I saw day in and day out. I'm like, getting it, just rocking. Like, some hip hop really know how to work a crowd like that.
But then the other side is if these, you're saying like I was agreeing with you, like how a lot of hip hop artists aren't as good live because of maybe it's their music that they're making or whatever. Maybe it just sounds better in your headphones. Yeah. But those hip hop artists, if they're not performing live in the first place, when they get to perform live, they're gonna suck. So like
Absolutely.
where do these hip hop artists go, I wonder?
The biggest thing with up and coming hip hop artists that I've seen is open mic nights, and I say this as somebody that played an open mic night for 4.5 years myself, because it's like, if you've never been on stage before, that's the best place to cut your teeth. It doesn't matter what you do. It could be, but hip hop especially, like, just go out to any open mic night. I don't know if they do them at Connor Burns so much. I know there's like I think there are other open mics that are more hip hop specific, and those would be the ones that I would go with if it were me in their shoes, but, go up on stage and just try doing 2 songs, live, and doing that. I guarantee you, go out and do that every week for like a year, whatever, while you're like grinding away in the studio every now and then and stuff. There's things you can learn like that, like how to work a crowd, the psychology of how people respond live on stage. And this is stuff that you can really only learn by going and doing it, because this always changes with the times too. Audiences evolve, and you have to just kind of go out there and experience that. And it's like rock bands too. Like rock bands have to go do that, where, you got to hit the stage and you got to learn, like, okay, they responded to that, but they didn't respond to that. Like, maybe I'll tweak this a little bit, or I'll try to do different next time. The best ability is not so much having like raw talent. It's more having that ability to look at yourself and say, what could I have done better? What can I change for next time? How can I elevate this experience? And you're always doing that all the time. Every show you play, every time you get on stage, even if it was a really good night, you don't have to bring people around, down around you or anything like that. Like, oh, that sucked or something. I'm not saying you got to do that, but like privately, in your head, you can just make a note, like, maybe I like switch that up next time, or like see how that works. And it's the art of live performance, and you can really only like get there by just going and doing it. Sometimes you could bypass it, because if you have like a really hot record or something like that, and people are coming out specifically to see you, and they already know you and they know your record, you could get on that stage and just bullshit for like an hour at that point. It wouldn't even matter, because it's like, and they're just so stoked to see you. Again, that's the psychology of like how people respond to live music when they're already familiar with the record, versus if you're just like a nobody and you're just trying to give them like a good live show that stands on its own merit without any propagandizing beforehand, if that makes sense what I'm talking about.
I get that.
Everyone
should listen to the Will Jordan analogy. Did you listen to the little Bebo?
I'm trying to remember what it was offhand, but
and that was really late into the interview, but Will Jordan was talking about, like, he was like, this works more for before COVID, but let's make up this artist named Little Bebo, and he's going to start at a ground one of open mic, meet those artists, build up that email list or friend list, and each open mic gain more people and stuff like that, and then that's your draw. So with venues in Seattle, is there like a beginning venue and like a level up venue? Like, are you starting at a very basic venue and then going to Barboza, or can you be like a newer band performing at Barboza, or how does that work?
You could be a newer band hopping to some of those bigger stages if you're opening for a larger act. And that does happen sometimes, where like a larger act, like that's more in the know with the scene, they might be like, oh, I know that person, they're really good. I know they don't really have a draw, but I still want to I want to give them that platform so they can get in front of like my people, because I know like my audience would like eat this up. I don't know if I could speak specifically to this. I don't want to speak for him, but like Dan Lyon from Spirit Award, when he did the show back at Numos, and he specifically got Antonioni and Black Ends to open up for him. 2 great bands, in their own right. I mean, Dan could have given that opening slot to whoever he wanted, and a lot of bands, some bands, frankly, would just auction those off, the pay to play thing and stuff like that. And people would buy on because they know if they can get in front of like all these people.
And that happens in Seattle?
I can't speak to specific instances of that happening in Seattle, but I know that definitely happens in the music industry where, it's a promotional thing. Back in the day, when Ozfest used to be a tour, I don't know if you ever heard of that or remembered that. The Ozfest, I want to say I had heard, and this was just a rumor, but I had heard that the buy-on to the main stage was about $125,000.
Damn.
And the second stage buy-on was like $70,000 for the tour. And record labels would put up this money because they know, like, if they're trying to break this new artist and they get them in front of like 30,000 people at the San Bernardino Amphitheater, they're all metalheads. Go buy the record, like that's your promo right there.
Wow.
So, or if you can sell them all T-shirts, and you made that money back.
Yeah.
So some bands, would do that with tours where they would just auction it off or make it like a buy-on slot. But getting back to my point that I was getting at with Numos, Dan Lyon from Spirit Award did not do that. Instead, he very deliberately went and got two bands in the Seattle scene that were doing awesome things, and they're great live. And he put them on that stage, you know, opening up for Spirit Award that night. And they both played a great show that night, everything from start to finish. Sometimes like the openers too, you know, you worry because like, oh, put the opener on because they know they suck or something like that to try and make the other band look good. Not Black Ends. Like Nicole, everybody in that band, like Black Ends went on and they were like just like great right off the bat.
I'm about to check these guys out. I don't know their music.
Black Ends, they're great. Absolutely. I would start with Stay Evil or Monday Morning. Those are like my two favorite songs from them, but they got a couple EPs out. Black Ends are great. Antonioni was really good that night too. They just put out a record I want to say it was self-titled, the full length. I'm blanking on the title, but the record just came out this last year. Start with their song Mary Bell. I would go with that one. It's probably my favorite off that record.
There we go.
You know, yeah. So Antonioni, Black End, Spirit Award. Anyways, what I was talking about with that though, you know, getting these bands on in front of those audiences, you know, it is a way to kind of help them build that draw. I don't think you necessarily need to do that in this day and age with that because, you know, you could put out, you know, you put out content, you have Instagram now, you have Spotify, like with singles and stuff. There's all sorts of other ways to get in front of an audience. Frankly, there's probably a lot bigger audience online than what you get in front of at even a sold out show in Seattle. But a show can be more relevant sometimes because you know it's an audience that's very into that particular kind of music. Like they're there because they love live music and they want to see this particular genre.
I feel like promoting nowadays is more left open.
Yeah.
Like when you're talking about the blogs,
you
knew what blogs are reaching out to because you know what type of audience they drew sometimes
they
would draw
in a lot of cases. The last time I was doing press for one of Blade Palace's first EPs, I mean, it was pretty depressing. Like I was going around a lot of these blog sites, you know, maybe used to be a thing a few years ago, and every one of them had a banner at the top that was just like, please donate to like help save our site. And it was just like, oh God, you know, like it was I hesitate to think about what their reach might have been at that point. It's not really a good look, I guess. But
nowadays there's like no. It's really weird. Like I can tell people what I've done that's helped me, but there's no one right answer anymore.
Because it changes every day, like with the algorithms and stuff like that. You know, and that's one thing that I've always wanted to do with the podcast is to kind of try and help connect everybody, because then it's like, you know, you can't predict who's going to get a win on any given week, whether it's a band, whether it's an influencer, like whoever it is.
Right.
You can't predict who's going to have a lucky week with the algorithms. But as long as everybody's connected in and everybody's talking and there's a dialogue going on, then it helps everybody, because sooner or later somebody is going to have a win and it's going to come back to everybody else. And then the next week they might have a bad week, and then the next person, you know, puts out like a single that pops off or has a really good live show or something like that. And as long as everybody's talking and connecting with each other, it all comes back and it all works out. I think that's really the only way to survive, but frankly.
If you're creating a podcast like this, does that mean you see a disconnect with the band communities or what?
That was part of it. I did kind of see like a disconnect when I first started. And I think the main problem was because when I had first started the podcast in August of 2020, we lost our live shows. You know, when we lost live shows, for bands, that was their platform to say something, to speak out, to be heard. And when March, April 2020 happened and all that just went away, you know, we were trying to do live streams. We were trying to do that because it was sort of like the obvious pivot. You know, it's not really the same because you don't experience the people around you, the environment, you know, all that other stuff that you kind of lose when you can't do live shows. And then towards May, you know, when you started to have, you know, like the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, if the music community in Seattle was already stressed prior to that, that stuff just pushed it over, you know, the brink to where everybody was in the streets protesting. No bands really even wanted to be on social media at that point, especially, you know, like
here's my new single.
You didn't want to do that because, you know, we were trying to keep those channels free for streams and to see what was going on with the protests and things like that. You wanted to keep it free for all that. And what, you know, started with the protests, you know, after George Floyd was murdered, and then what evolved into Chaz and CHOP and all that, you know, and eventually evolved into the everyday marches and the protests. again, we were trying to stay off social media during that time, a lot of the bands that I knew. And by August, it was pretty bleak. August of 2020, because by then the everyday marches were still happening, of course. But I was just looking around the music scene at that point, and it was just like, it's like, if you're an artist or something like that, what are the platforms out here? Like,
right.
Something. So that was a point where, even though, like we said at the start of this, I had really not wanted to do anything, like podcast or anything like that for years before. That was a point where I was looking around and I'm like, okay, I know I'm not the greatest protester in the world. Like, I'm not going to front, but like, what's something I can do here to try to give people a platform, try to give people a voice about what's going on. Because I felt very selfish in part, just at that point, just sort of like going back and forth to my practice space, just
right.
play music while the whole like community's like falling apart around me, So that was the impetus to start the podcast.
And did you have like connections at that point, or did you?
I just knew the bands that Blade Palace had played with on stage.
Got it.
So I knew some people, but I really wasn't that hooked into the Seattle music scene at that point, honestly.
So you just play like shows that you could get on, and then that's go home, or what?
Well, I'm talking more. We weren't playing shows at all by that point. I'm talking, this was back like pre-quarantine, when like Blade Palace was still playing shows, like other bands that we knew in the scene prior to that.
But would you connect with those bands outside of just playing shows, or?
I really wouldn't, for the most part. I mean, we'd give each other's numbers and stuff, and maybe, talk smack every now and then, text around and stuff. But we'd keep in touch during quarantine. But then when I started up the podcast, the first couple of bands I wanted to have on were just other bands that I knew, make it easy on myself to start on, But it was cool because I would have people on, and people would name drop other bands or talk about other things that were happening in the scene. It was like 5 more leads for me to follow up on. Like, I've never heard of them. Like, let me go check them out and take a listen to the record. And one interview after another would just kind of snowball like that. So I'd start learning about all this stuff that just wasn't even on my radar before. And then I started listening to the music too, though, is the thing. Because this is one thing I sort of realized. It's like, a lot of these bands were putting out records, and people might like a photo on Instagram, or they might click like on a Facebook status. But a lot of people weren't actually listening to the songs. They weren't listening to the records.
Right.
And it was, in my mind, it was a travesty, because like, I was listening to this stuff, and some of these songs were like, these were not the records that you might, people always stereotype out of the local music scene and everybody sucks or stuff like that. No, these, like, a lot of these records were fucking brilliant, and I'm like, why are more people not talking about this stuff or listening to these things? So it was an educational experience for me, just doing all that.
Don't you have a playlist or something?
I started doing the Spotify playlist for that reason, because I can only interview one band at a time on the podcast, but I'm like, there's way more out here than that. I need to be doing more to like try and get this music out. So I'd get songs from all these other bands. I'd start putting them on Spotify playlists. I'd start putting them out on my Instagram, like, hey, check this out.
And what's the name of this playlist for people to check out?
So I have a couple Spotify playlists going on now. The first one is called Seattle Bands That Aren't Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Heart, or Alice in Chains. Give it like a very clickbaity title like that, And that playlist is much more along the lines of like garage, punk, gunk pop, like Black Ends and stuff like that. It's a lot just darker and heavier musically. And then the other playlist that I have going on is Seattle bands that aren't Fleet Foxes, Band of Horses, or Sunny Day Real Estate. And that one is more dream pop, psychedelic, soft indie, stuff like that. I also have a Seattle hip hop one. It's called Seattle Hip Hop That Isn't Macklemore.
Hey, there we go.
Yeah, and on that one I got Lived, I got Rel Be Free, Stas the Boss, again, great records.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to this stuff. I'm like, this is, I love this. Like, I'm just doing everything I can to get all these bands out. I have a jazz one too. I have an acoustic one. Like, all this music that I've come across in the last year, and I'm just trying to sort, catalog, and curate. Because right now it's just like you have this environment where everybody's just putting out music to their social media channels, but there's no, I'm not going to say there's no, Ava Walker at KEXP Audio Oasis. I mean, she does a lot for like the local scene with her show, but there's really not a whole lot of outlets cataloging and curating this stuff and trying to just make sense of it all. So the average person that just likes music or want to hear some new music, you could actually give them a record and be like, oh, you like so-and-so, this, that, oh, check this out. Like, you dig this,
So if people are checking out your podcast for the first time, like what is the general type of artist you have on? Is it mostly just bands? Have you gone into rappers or jazz artists at all yet? Or
I stick to bands because that's
Okay.
the world that I'm from, and I've done hip hop playlists and stuff like that, but I can't have a for real conversation about hip hop with somebody. Like, I mean, I could talk a little bit,
Hey,
but
we can talk about hip hop.
we can talk a little bit, but it's just not in the way that I could talk about bands in Seattle, so that's, I stick to the bands because I always felt that, again, for one, that's the world that I'm from. And then the other thing is I always felt like social media kind of gave a promotional advantage to solo artists because if you're doing your own content, your own social media, you can call all the shots with that. If you're a solo artist, you could just wake up out of bed in the morning like, I'm going to do a selfie now. And you don't have to like run it by like a whole bunch of people, or hopefully you don't. Hopefully you're doing all your own stuff.
Right.
Whereas like with bands, if you've ever tried to do social media by committee, I mean, it's a nightmare. Like, it's just like very hard to find a consensus on that. It's very demoralizing too, because it's not the reason why you start a band with these people.
Yeah.
But the thing about it with social media too is that people are more inclined to follow individuals than they are to follow brands, companies.
I see that.
Bands, organizations. Exactly. Right.
I have I have a podcast. So I have my podcast Instagram, and then I have my personal Instagram.
Right.
My personal Instagram has less followers than the podcast Instagram.
Really?
And I'll get more likes on my personal Instagram than my podcast Instagram, just because people know that when they go to the podcast Instagram, it's promoting a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of bands, I will say too, like on the flip side, like a lot of bands, I feel like don't really do that right because they just like, you go to their Instagram or whatever, and the whole thing is like, feels like an advertisement.
Yeah.
The music.
Just flyer.
Yeah. Flyer. Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm talking about. It's like, and so it doesn't feel like they're actually doing like being social on it. Like everything's an advertisement. So I do think that like some of that is like on the bands too, but
it sucks you have to do that in the first place,
It does, because the thing about marketing through content is if you have a band that's already working day jobs just to keep their head above water financially while they're doing this, and then making the music is like a full-time job on top of that, and now you got to be a full-time influencer on top of that, it's just like, I hope to God you don't have a spouse or a loved one. Like, something's got to give at that point.
Oh, God.
You know what I mean? There's just like no way.
Oh,
it's very difficult to try and bite all that off. So, with Raised on Rhythm, I always just wanted to try and create a platform that helped even the playing field a little bit with that.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm going to do one that's like just for the bands, There are solo artists that I talk to and I have on that are like in orbit, especially of that scene, like Danny Denial. Danny's great with what he's doing for the community and everything with Bazooka Fest and everything like that. And even with Danny, like he's had like Dark Smith, like he's been in bands before, and he's very much in the orbit of like the DIY like punk scenes in Seattle. So again, solo artist by branding for sure, but he's like, you can come on, you can get this, it's cool.
So where does the Martial Law Band fall into like the band community? Because he's in the hip hop community. Marshall is actually a rapper. He has the
shout
band.
Shout out to Marshall. He's the best, man. Like Martial Law Band, I will say, man, I have not seen another band in Seattle with the hustle that band has. Like, they work, like every damn, weekend, like they're out, they're doing something, they have Fremont Fridays over the summer, they're putting out content. Like Marshall's all up on Instagram, the motivational stuff, like every day. Stuff like I still see it, and like I think they've really just created such a lane of their own at this point because of all the work that they put in, all the community building that they did, frankly, just for their following. I don't know that their following would necessarily translate to like other bands in Seattle, because like other bands might be in kind of a different lane,
right? But
to me, it's like you can't deny the work that they've put in for what they do. I mean, they work their asses off. And they reap the benefit of it, man, because everything with them is like DIY. They just play and they pull up and they play anywhere. I remember like last fall in 2020 when they had like the Jelly Bean. They built like, the trailer like on the back of the SUV where they were just driving that thing all over the city like jamming. And I remember the first time I saw it in Columbia City, like I was just hanging down there one day. And God, it was such a trip. And I knew Dan Ray, she was down there too at the time, and And we were just hanging out by the parade float, and Dan Ray just looks at me like, "You want to jump on this thing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I feel like a little weird. Like, should I be doing this, or whatever?" But Chris King was there, and like everybody was cool with it. So like, fuck it, I'll jump down, just duck over here on the side. I'm not trying to bring attention to myself, but God, we rode that thing all the way through like Columbia City with them up Rainier, and over across on Jackson, and then going up first, and they just like playing music the whole way, and like, it was like gnarly. And I'm like, there's no other band in Seattle that even comes close to that level of like drive as far as trying to get their music out there.
True. So what is the main sound that you'd say is coming out of bands in the Seattle area?
There's a few different sounds. You have I actually have another playlist that's, again, martial law bands on there, but it's more focused on the kind of like jam, just like that funk mixed with hip hop and rock and like all these flavors like that. There's bands like Martial Law Band and Fast Nasties, and Modus is another band that I have on that playlist. So that's like that sphere of things. And then you also have, kind of like the post-grunge, like garage punk stuff, Black Ends, kind of shoegazy stuff like Floored Faces, one of my favorite bands at the moment in Seattle. Just stuff, very like post-punk kind of stuff. Like, I guess Antonioni, I might put him in that category to some degree. I'm like rattling off. It's like all these bands flying through my head.
You know what's crazy for me though? I feel like I'm doing something right when I get like, when I'm like in uncomfortable situation, whether uncomfortable is the right word or like out of my element, maybe out of my element. So like when I first started the podcast, I didn't know a single artist that people were talking about. Yeah. And then as I've grown, I'll look back at the old podcast and be like, oh, I've had that guy on or whoever, or I still need to reach out to that person or whatever it is. Yeah. So I feel like I appreciate you telling me all these names because I don't know a single one of these names whatsoever. Yeah. But I'm going to meet all you guys eventually, and I'm very excited about that.
Absolutely. And I'll send you the playlist because it's really, like I said, it's just you listen to the music. That's the biggest thing. A lot of people know the names, but it's like, man, like tell me your favorite songs. Or like,
but what are the genres coming out? Like, what are the main? Would you say we just did? I have a second podcast called the BBC podcast, and today we just released our episode. It's a conspiracy theory podcast, but this episode wasn't really that conspiracy theory field. It was more a prediction, and it was called "The Return of Pop Punk."
Okay.
So we've been seeing like an upward trend of pop punk from rap, bands or whatever. Like, is that a big genre coming out of Seattle right now, or would you say it's...
There's definitely, shout out to Gordon College Radio, because he's doing a huge showcase at El Corzo on this Saturday night where he's got like a dream team of Seattle pop punk bands playing this thing. And I actually have a playlist for that too, Seattle pop punk culture.
Hell yeah.
There's a bunch of bands that I got on there. So to try and sum it up, I know my answer earlier was maybe a little off, but like trying to sum this up, I would say, you got pop punk, you got jam, you got I would say like garage rock, garage punk, dream pop, shoegaze.
But what does garage mean? Does garage mean you're just a local, or I don't know what garage
So
means.
there's a distinguish there. Like basically there's like garage band in the way a lot of people think of that term, where it's just like a band that's just set up in a garage, just like, and it could be like any genre. And then there's garage rock as it refers to like essentially a genre of rock and roll that really had its roots, kind of back in the 70s and stuff. But the whole point was kind of like very stripped down, very like not too pretentious, kind of minimal instrumentation. If I had to give specific bands, people like OCs, the OCs, garage rock offhand, I don't know, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard to some degree.
These names are wild.
I know they're wild. The music is wild too. You gotta listen to music, man. And it's a whole world, and it's stuff that's like I think was really popular on the West Coast because when I used to live in the South, some of these bands, it's like it's like they wouldn't really.
What about what type of genre is getting signed the most out of Seattle?
Getting signed the most. Hip hop, hands down.
Well, band wise, other bands,
Band-wise.
but I've also been told that
See-
bands aren't looking to get signed. But I feel like they
See,
are.
that's the thing. Well, they are and
They
they
want
aren't.
money.
Everybody wants money. Yeah, for sure. They are and they aren't, because the thing about getting signed, and this is what a lot of people don't realize about record deals and getting signed. You're borrowing their money
Right.
to do your thing. Now, if you're borrowing their money, they're calling the shots.
Got it.
And the problem with a lot of bands, not the problem with a lot of bands, the thing I love about a lot of bands, frankly, is like when you're doing this stuff, you're making the music you want to make the way you want to make it, and you're doing it to express a feeling. It's a very, genuine thing on your part. So you can't let nobody call your shots in that way.
Mm-hmm.
You really can't have it. You don't want that to be the case. Otherwise, it just becomes a job. And if you're going to work a job you hate, go to work at Amazon or Microsoft or something like
Right.
that. You know what I mean? So in terms of getting signed, it doesn't always make business sense for a band, because why are we going to borrow all this money from somebody and then we don't know if we're going to repay it or not, or if we'll be able to repay it with the amount of like live revenue, record sales, that we can honestly get. I'm just speaking strictly from a business standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in this day and age where you can do so much on your own. Like if you're putting your music out there, if you can say, if you have like even a semi-decent day job, right, and you could save up a couple $1,000, honestly, some of these record deals that like bands will get, especially on the indie level and stuff like that, they're not worth that much.
Then what's the next step then? Like if you're not going to be signed to a record label, how are you going to make a money where you can completely forget about your day job?
Sure.
Never have to do anything that's even part-time.
That's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
And well, the thing about that, I mean, first off, you got to figure out like what that number actually looks like, in terms of like what's a specific dollar amount.
Okay. What about this? What if you wanted to make at least $100,000 a year?
At least $100,000 a year. You're aiming high right there.
Yeah. There we go.
100,000 a year. All right. Well, that's your number. So now you got to break it down as far as like what amount of money you're going to make off a show, merchandising, album sales, stuff like that. The reason I don't like looking at it like that is because those are all things that are very much out of your control.
Are they?
Yeah. I can't control. You could do something like art that's very genuine. I can't force people to like my art. I can't force them to value my music. I can't force them to buy a record. Those are goals. Excuse me.
No worries.
Those are goals that are all very much outside of my control. I can work and I know I can like create the record and I could try to make like the best t-shirt I can that I think is going to sell or something. There's stuff there that is within my control and is within a band's control. But you really don't like set that as your goal, because you're almost always going to be disappointed, because most of the time, like, that's not going to happen. Like, you're going to put a record out and people just don't have the response that you were hoping they had or something like that. If you're doing something because you actually love doing it, and this is like very genuine art on your part, then it's like you have to realize that might be all you ever get out of it. But if you're doing that and you're really doing this from a place of like, I really love what I'm doing, I really want to be doing this, then it doesn't matter how many times you lose, you still feel like you won. Even if you're broke, even if you're working a day job, whatever the case is, like, you still won. It's the feeling that you get out of it. And likewise, if you're doing something that you hate, you can't stand, or you're just like, oh, we're just making this because like we think this is going to sell or something like that. No matter how many times you win with that, even if it does work out, you still end up very empty inside. And there are people that, have that problem in the music business, and they end up turning to all sorts of substances and bad habits, trying to fill that void in their heart that comes from doing that, where it's like, okay, yeah, this is working business wise, but this feels very, very hollow to me. It doesn't feel like I'm really, fulfilled off this. One of the things I love, there's a quote from Kim from Soundgarden once said years ago that it's like, one of the things about the Seattle music scene, this is something I fell in love with the Seattle music scene. Music up here was always a very genuine thing. It wasn't really something that people went into doing because it was just like, oh, I want to get like signed, or I want to get famous, this, that, and the third. It was something that they did to make it through the winter without killing themselves, basically. Right. It was something that, it's a community thing. It's a thing that you do to like bring people together and meet people, have a good time, like socially and stuff like that. And beyond that, like, if you're getting that out of it, as long as you can make like a minimal amount of money to support yourself through like a day job or something like that, then the rest of your life is just so enriched by that.
But then I feel like, I feel like if you're a rapper, then you're fucked. Because if they're not, first of all, it's super oversaturated. No one wants to buy your merch.
Yeah.
Unless you're collaborating with someone that's like.
Yeah. But here's the thing about it, man. It's like, if you're thinking about it from a commercial standpoint of how do I make this amount or that amount, you're probably going to look to the people that are already successful in that front, and what are they doing? And maybe I might try to copy off them. But the problem is by the time that you figured out what that is, the trend's already moved on. The trend's already moved on to the next thing. So if you try to copy that and you try to do it, probably ain't going to work for you because everybody's already seen that already.
But then what's your mindset? Like, you said you don't like people asking, what are your goals in 5 years? But like, what are your goals with your music then? Like, are you happy? But do you feel like you're stuck, or how do you feel?
I don't feel stuck. I feel like every day I get to wake up and I get to make the music I want to make with the people I love working with, the way we want to play, and we get to go out and we get to have fun. And like every day, that's my life. I get to wake up and do stuff like that. Yeah, I do other stuff too, aside of that. I don't mind. I mean, a lot of the work that I do, even like rideshare driving, I kind of enjoy. Like I look at it as like I get paid to drive all over the city and eat lunch at different places and talk to different kind of people. Like I enjoy the work that I get to do on all fronts, and that love for me is like something that's like really taking care of me, because there were times when I was younger, I'll put it this way, when I was a teenager and, my early 20s, and I had those kind of like rock star dreams and stuff like that. And of course, they don't happen for a variety of reasons.
But I want to tell people, everyone, look me in my eyes.
Sure. Yeah.
These rock star dreams can happen, but you guys need to know what it takes. I feel like people, the age of someone just walking up to you, or just some magical wizard coming and solving your dreams is false. You need to have a strict like business plan. And like if rock, this is my biggest thing.
Sure.
This is a stereotype too, though.
Absolutely. Go for it.
I feel like a lot of rock and roll artists or bands decide not to have like relationships because they want to focus in on all their music. But if you're saying bands don't want to be signed to a record label, if you're going through life just making music and you turn 50, 60 years old and you're still performing, and you're not in a relationship, then what then? Like, you don't have someone that you could have just shared. You could have shared that 50, like, well, let's say you meet someone when you're 20 or something. You could have had that 30 years of experience with someone and still played music, but you could have still been with someone you love. Sure.
So hindsight is always 20/20 with that. You're always going to look back in your life, and any big decision like that, it's going to be, I always call it like the ghost ship that's riding along your side. If you're on the sea, on your boat, and then there's like this ghost ship right next to you of like, what could have been if I had done this or that in the third.
Christmas past.
Exactly. And it's always going to be like that with any decision you make in life, no matter what. But for me, it's like, I always look at it as like, if success is getting everything you want, happiness is actually wanting everything that you get. And in this country especially, I feel like we have this kind of what I call the success industrial complex.
Okay.
Which is like people's lives. A lot of people are miserable. They're strung out. They're struggling. Like, I get it. Like, it's a very real problem. But we sort of tell them that if you're successful at whatever it is you're doing, it could be sports, music, whatever, medicine, law. If you're successful at that, then that'll make all those problems go away. You'll finally be happy. Right? Or something like that. We tell people that. It's kind of like a motivator, a driver. But then here's what happens. Most of the time, like, they don't get there, frankly. But then even if they do get there, they're still feeling very unfulfilled, because then they get there and it's just like, well, wait a second, I thought I was supposed to feel happy now. I thought I was supposed to feel like fulfilled.
But the thing is, they get there with all that money, but then they don't know who to talk to like what do you do once you have that money? Like, there's not resources in our specific community of music.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's not any place you can go once you reach a certain level of success, or you want to reach a certain level of success, where you can talk to people and express how you're feeling, and then like build together. Like, you just have to find those people in the scene, versus there being like a hub or something you can reach out to for help or whatever it is.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we're quite talking about the same thing, but I think that, I always say you want to take the job that you would take even if you were independently wealthy. The job that you would still want to do if you woke up in the morning and I had like more than enough money that I needed in the bank, because that's going to be the job you're actually happy at, the job that you're actually fulfilled with. You'll still want to do it no matter what. Like, there's people like that have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, billions of dollars worth of stock options. They still wake up every day and want to go do what they do, because it's the process. It's the process that they're in love with, not the proceeds. The proceeds are nice too. Don't get me wrong.
So there's certain processes makes them money.
It's the process that makes you feel fulfilled, that you actually enjoy what you get to do. That's what makes you want to do it.
Right.
And you get a love out of that nothing else can compete with if that's actually what you want to be doing. There's people like that, like, you know, you could think of, you know, like some nerdy tech nerd types, and a lot of people like see those people and they're like, oh, well, they're just all about the money. I mean, yeah, money matters to them, but it's really not what got them where they were at. What got them where they were at was just they were this person that really just loved sitting there like working on computer code, you know, or doing this, that, and the third. It just so happens that they had a love and a passion that in this particular society translated to lots and lots of money because it was valuable for others.
Right.
You know, I would say that, like, if I had wanted to be like a firefighter, for instance, you know, and like you could have a very happy and fulfilled life doing that. You probably won't make millions of dollars at it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like when you have to lay your head down on the pillow, it's like the money and all that doesn't matter. It's, you know, you have to like live with yourself at the end of the day. And when you're actually doing the stuff that you enjoy, like you're very fulfilled and at peace with that stuff. And the money's kind of like secondary, as long as you got enough to eat, of course.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I believe in that. I'm not...
Yeah.
I feel like when I ask these questions to artists,
yeah,
it makes it come off like I'm some like money hungry guy or something.
No, but listen, yeah, like like there's nothing wrong with being hungry. Don't get me wrong. Right. I love that. You know, like it's good to have that energy too, for sure.
I just feel like people, I don't know.
Yeah.
People, you can, if in the art scene specifically though, I feel like you can make money.
Yeah.
Maybe $100,000 is too much of a reach for like an artist, but maybe it's not. But there should be a level where you can make money just doing what you love, but you know how you're getting that money and not just banking on, okay, hopefully people are buying this merch or hopefully people are streaming. Like there's just got to be like some solid foundation versus just being this independent artist and like not knowing for sure, like, you know,
man, if you're looking for a solid foundation like that, you're in the wrong business with music.
I don't think it's gotta be though. That's the thing.
It doesn't have to be.
And that's why I brought up like the hub analogy. I'm on the train. I'm following what you're saying.
Yeah. I think, for instance, like I'll give you an example. Like when I used to do like the Meddlesome gig in Atlanta, right? Like that was a pretty solid foundation, like financially or otherwise.
Right.
You know, like I made it. Like I was living the dream. I was making like a living playing music at that point. But the setup was all like, you know, I wasn't that into what I was doing. I mean, I enjoyed the job, don't get me wrong, like when I was on it, but always in the back of my head, I was just like, I don't know if playing Mr. Brightside night after night for the rest of my 30s is like really the best use of that time. Like I said, I didn't feel like I was done yet in terms of original bands. Like I still wanted to like do more stuff with that particular gig wasn't really allowing me to do. Yes, I achieved the dream or, you know, whatever that vision was, you know, that I had when I was younger. But then, like I say, it's very possible to get there. You're just not that happy with what's going on because when you're not experiencing that, when you're not living that day to day, you might not even know what that is. There's people who go to law school like that, never spent a day in a law office.
Right.
You know, it's like, do you actually understand what you're wishing for with that? You know what I mean? Like,
so what's your overall dream with like goal with your life then?
What's my goal with my life? Kind of do the same stuff I'm already doing right now, which is just like I say, just doing the stuff I enjoy. I've already I've hit that goal. I keep doing it, and there's other things I want to do, like as far as like music. Like I'd love to tour more. I'd love to do this, that, and the third. But I'm not tripping if like a lot of that stuff doesn't happen, because like I'm already like I'm good with where I'm at.
So just making music's fulfilling for you.
Yeah, it is. Playing drums specifically.
There we go.
Yeah, that's always been that way from like the time I was a kid. Playing drums was always a way that, growing up kind of a socially awkward kid in a place that I didn't really feel like I fit in or belonged, that was how I felt that I could transcend that.
Wait, so you keep saying you didn't feel like you belonged, and
yeah,
why is that? Were you like was there a lot of black guys and you're only a white kid, or what was it?
You're getting warmer. It wasn't even about that. It was just like socially, I grew up, my family was really just my mom and my dad down there. And if you were in Miami, your mom and dad lived there, your cousins all lived there, your aunts and uncles all lived there. You had like extended family, and there were big social networks that were happening with that.
Right.
And my family wasn't religious either, so they didn't really have anything, like a church network or like there wasn't really a lot of people around us. I kind of grew up kind of a loner for that reason. I had a few friends when I was younger. I'm not going to say like I had none, but it was just a place where socially, I didn't feel like I was favored or like I had to like work a lot harder to just get people to take notice or anything like that. I think it was kind of a blessing because like that work ethic and that fire that kind of instilled in me, I've carried that over to a lot of other things I've done in my life.
Right.
So it's not all bad, but eventually like I knew like, man, like what if I just was living in a place or doing something where I didn't feel like I was having to swim upstream the whole time, and I just had a lot more mental bandwidth to offer to like whatever I was working on, instead of feeling like I was having to like just swim upstream just to, survive basically.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a motivation for wanting to get out of Florida. I never had the balls when I was a kid to be like that train hopping, kind of dude that was going to like run away from home when I was 14 or stuff like that. I just never had really like a social structure with that.
But you knew you wanted to leave. Even outside of,
I felt like life had to be better. like it couldn't be this miserable all the time, like in Miami.
So so you wanted to move like outside of the state? Was that always a goal, or just outside of your city?
If there was such a thing as growing up in completely the wrong place for your energy and your vibe, that was me growing up in Miami.
Wow.
Like, so I felt like, even when I used to come out to Seattle, like first time I came out here, like 2016. I'd come out here like when I was very young, because my dad's family actually is from Washington State, originally around there. They go back.
Wow.
But when I came out to Seattle in 2016, it was just like, whoa, like this is cool. Like there's something going on. Like I feel just more at peace here, at ease. Some people, it might be the opposite. Like I know people that grow up in Seattle and it's like, oh, I hate it here, and get out. So hey, you got a whole country, like go for it. Wherever you feel at home. So I guess you could say I kind of like found my way to this place where I feel very at home, here in this city and in this community, versus like where I grew up. Still, it was a cool experience to have growing up there, to get all the bullshit out of the way down there. Not all the bullshit, but, like have those formative experiences and those, wilding out moments in a place where like if I pissed off a bunch of people, I wasn't going to be stuck there forever. It's like it didn't really matter. I could learn my lessons. I could learn all my life lessons down there, or a lot of them. And then by the time I got to a place where I actually wanted to be at, like I was much more mature and just calmer as a person, as a human being. I was fucking nuts when I was a teenager.
Do you miss Atlanta or at all? Or?
Atlanta was a cool place. If you told me I had to spend the rest of my life in Atlanta, I definitely wouldn't be unhappy. Like living in Atlanta, like that was a cool spot, So it's like, you asked me, like, being the white kid growing up in Miami, like it wasn't quite like that, you know what I mean? Because like Atlanta's a very diverse place too. It's like it's never been an issue with like me living in diverse places. I welcome that. I enjoy that.
Right.
It was more just like, I guess, when I was growing up in Miami, it's just like nobody really wanted to talk to you, because you didn't look the right way, or you didn't know the right people, and nobody wanted to talk to you, so you really couldn't get to know the right people or something like that.
That's
You're
crazy.
just kind of like off on your own in this like weird little world, playing rock. But get up to Seattle, I'm a lot more at home now. My parents still live in Miami, and I enjoy visiting down there for that reason, because I can go down there and it's just like, oh, I can like experience the best of it, and then when I'm like starting to get bored or whatever, it's like, all right, time to go back to Seattle. I'm good now.
Well, we're all weirdos in here in Seattle, so
exactly. Like it's much more my speed up here.
There we go.
That's cool.
Well, I appreciate you opening up about your community here, and I hope to become more of part of this band community. And
I hope to have you out here too, man. Just as soon as you hit 21, don't worry. Like, I hit you with all the shows and stuff like that.
Yeah, Marshall's been giving me shit about that.
Oh, really?
He thought I was like 25 for some reason. So like anytime he sees me now, he's like, "What is this little boy doing here?"
Shout
like,
out to Marshall,
God.
man. He's like, oh my God.
So what's some advice that you have for up and coming artists, creators, influencers?
Oh my God, if anybody's still listening to this right now, man, like, do what you do because you're into it and because you don't know how to do anything else, because at the end that love might be all you ever get out of it, and as long as you still get that, you're happy no matter what. If success is getting everything you want, happiness is actually wanting everything that you get. Never confuse the two, and other than that, I don't know, man, just have fun and make music.
There we go. What is the easiest way for people to reach you?
I'm all on the Instagram at Raised on Rhythm. Instagram is where the party's at. I post Seattle show calendars twice a week. Anytime I'm doing something with the podcast or one of my bands, it's all up on there in the stories. Maybe even a meme once in a while. Sometimes I post my Italian cooking on there too.
There we go.
Yeah, exactly like that. Twitter at Raised on Rhythm. I'm not on there that much though, honestly. Facebook, raisedonrhythm.com for the podcast. The link tree is all on my Instagram. And you can come out to the free show that I'm doing on Wednesday, September 8th. It's also my 35th birthday that night.
Happy birthday.
It's gonna thank you. Going on at the Substation. It's gonna be Rainbow Coalition Death Cult, which is Nicole from Black Ends and Maya Marie from Stereo Sauna. It's their new thrash metal project. I'm stoked to have them on that bill. Like, they're great. Rainbow Coalition Death Cult, Blade Palace, that is the band I'm in, one of the bands I'm in, and then Oh My Eyes is kicking off tonight. It's gonna be a free show. Bring your proof of vax though. Make sure you got vax. Don't come out if you don't have proof of vax, bro.
There we go. This is the NAST podcast with
Nate Lewis.
And we did it.